thank you for coming to my lecture. My name is Shawnee, and I portray a 18th century frontier midwife. You notice that I said that I more or less pretend to be one. I am not one in real life. I only play that on TV. And my other favorite line to that whole thing is, you know, I know nothing about birth and no babies, other than the 3 that I had birth to. So do not think I really do this in my real life. But like most things, and history teachers, you don't need to actually do it to tell you about it. And I'm not going to teach you how to have babies today. That's another time when it's more private. This is more like what life was like for a midwife. But in order to understand what a midwife's life was like, you have to understand what a doctor, a surgeon, and an apothecary did. A doctor didn't become a doctor because he was good. Doctor became a doctor because they had enough money to send that man to school. So most doctors were of upper crust. Well, so now there's already a division in society, and they liked those people, and they made a lot of money on the upper crust. If you ever watched Downton Abbey, and they would say, oh, you know, he's a duke and he knows more about being a doctor than you do. It's like, no, he has a title. You know, so a doctor was not somebody who necessarily was the best in their field. A surgeon oftentimes was a butcher. Now, I kind of appreciate that because at least they know about anatomy and the organs. I might be built a little differently than a pig, I hope, or a cow. I only have one stomach. But as they're butchering, they're learning about the organs and what things do. So if you went to a surgeon, that would be cheaper than a doctor. An apothecary was a pharmacy. For all intents and purposes, if you went to see a doctor, he would give you a prescription. You would go to the pharmacy to fill that, which at that time was an apothecary. They had all sorts of herbs. They had tinctures. You know, depending on what you look at, they had exotic methods of things. Maybe a little bit of it wasn't quite on the level, but some of them were. And what they would do is you would come in and say, man, my knee hurts. It's always hurting, it's always hurting. And you would have that conversation, and they might give you herbs to grind up to put on your knee, which we call a poultice. They might give you a tea to drink, something like that. So they would also, to an extent, quasi-practice medicine. Well, birthing babies was considered woman's work, which is kind of funny because it kind of is woman's work. And I think we know a little bit more about birthing babies than men do. Prove me wrong, but I'm pretty sure we do. So, a midwife's job was to definitely birth babies. Let me pick this great stuff up here. And what they did was from the beginning of time. How long do you think babies have been being born? For a while, a few years maybe, right?
Since Adam and Eve.
Since Adam and Eve, yeah. Someone birthed that baby. So Adam might have been the first midwife. I'll give him that. But outside of that, it became everybody else's job as a woman. And midwives have been around forever. And every single culture had a form of midwife. They might not have called it a midwife. They might have called it something else. But they were there to take care of the births of the babies. And a lot of times an entire women of villages would get together and do that. And they would work as a team. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I know women who've been in labor for hours and days. And I'm not going to stay there and rub her back for 16, 20 hours. I'm going to need some help. All right, we're going to walk them around. We also didn't like to drug our patients up. We wanted them to walk. We wanted them to do pushing exercises. We wanted them to squat. We wanted to do things as natural as possible. Because there was no such thing as herbal medicine in the 18th century. It was just called medicine. It's the only herbs we had. Okay? You couldn't go get a Z-Pack from the doctor. The Z-Pack had not been invented yet. So all the herbs that we used then, that many of us still use now, were the great-grandparents of the herbs that they the pills that they prescribe right now in medicine. So the colony's first midwives, her name was Bridget Lee Fuller. And she actually delivered 3 babies on a ship on the way here in 1620. Doing it a while, she was good. And she practiced until her death in 1664. So that was the true first documented colonial midwife. Now babies sometimes take a little work, right? Sometimes they don't want to come out. Sometimes they come out feet first. And a good midwife would have to know that. How do you think she learned how to do that?
Somebody else.
Yep, she apprenticed under somebody else. Maybe her grandmother, maybe it was the neighbor, maybe it was just a local midwife, and she had an interest in it, and that's what she wanted to do. Because I don't know about you, but hands-on learning is the best way to learn. They didn't have YouTube back then, and so they actually had to learn by doing. And the best way to learn is to practice that. Midwives were not just baby deliverers. They took care of every single thing that could possibly be wrong with you, minus some surgery. And I'm not saying that there weren't midwives that did surgery. I just not have found any that have. But just like most things, there's always that one-off person who can do it. Maybe Claire went back in time and really did it. I don't know. Find me those stones. I'd be happy to go through it with her. But I'm just saying. So if you had a toothache, if you fell down and cut yourself, if your entire family was sick, which a lot of times was what happened, a midwife would get the old, it could be 2 o'clock in the morning, sound asleep, need the midwife. Okay, up she gets, she packs her bag. I left my bag at the apothecary. She packs her bag and what she needs. She's going to take a mortar and pestle. She's going to take her herbs. She might take a knife that she uses. I usually carry mine with me. This is going to do everything from chopping herbs to cutting umbilical cords. Do you think I'm going to wash it in between? Probably not. We'll talk about that in a little bit. They're going to gather their pouch, whatever they're going to put it in, maybe their market bag. I don't care what, I don't know what everybody else carries. I carry a little leather pouch, and that's what I go out in. Right? That's what I'm going to take. How am I going to get there? I'm not going to fire up the F-250. No, I'm going to go by canoe if I have to go on the river, or I'm going to go by foot or by hoof. And hoof could be any animal that's got a hoof that I can ride. Right? Doesn't necessarily have to be a horse. I know a lady in my own town that really rode cows. Bless her, it was funny. I would ride a cow before I would walk 10 miles, absolutely. She's going to get to that person's house, she's going to walk in, and it might be the entire family's been there sick for days. Nobody calls a midwife, a doctor, or anybody until they're really sick, because it's going to cost you something. It may not cost coin, but there's going to be some barter and trade. You're going to owe her something. Something's going to happen. This is her job. She gets paid to do this. She's going to come in. Beauty thing about a midwife, not only is she going to take care of your family, she's probably going to do your dishes for you. She's probably going to clean up all of the mess that you have done. And we all know the messes that are associated with sickness, correct? Right? Either way. She's going to do that, and she's probably going to try to feed you along making some herbs. Now, the herbs that she would have used are going to depend on the sickness and where they're from. Every culture has their own herbs. In America, who do you think was practicing herbal medicine first?
The Indians.
The natives, right. We learned a few things from them. The one thing I still want to know, and no one can answer this question, how many of you guys here eat poke salad?
Yeah.
Right? How many people died before they realized you had to boil them leaves 3 times? I have a theory about that. See, us frontier women, we could take care of our husbands when we didn't like them. They died mysteriously. There were no autopsies. And I really believe that, like that first lady went, "Here, honey, I made you a salad. Would you like to eat this?" And he died. And she went, "I'm on to something."
Yeah, boy.
And then she thought, well, it kind of looks bad. I'm going to boil it the first time. So that husband died. She boiled it the second time. The third time, he didn't die. Well, third time's a charm. That's my theory. So I'm going to stick with it. I don't know if it's true or not, but we're going to go with it. Don't quote me on that. It's not in the history books. I write my own history. So doctors, they did a thing called the 4 humors. They believed that blood represented cheer and courage, and that phlegm represented apathy. Now, phlegm was any pretty clear bodily fluid, including men's bodily fluids that we don't have. Yellow bile equaled anger. and black bile equaled melancholy. If your humors were not in balance, if you were too angry, they're going to have to get rid of some of that. And the way to do that would be to give you something to make you go to the outhouse a lot. They got to get that back in balance. Now, we listen to that now and go, that was kind of weird. We don't do that. And midwives usually wouldn't lead you. So we didn't really practice the 4 humors. We knew about them, we understood them, but it was a doctor thing, so we didn't necessarily do those. We would look at the person as a whole. Most of the time we knew this person from birth. Known you a long time, we know what's wrong with you. You don't normally act that way. What's wrong? Are you okay? Well, you know, I've been having this cramp. There's a chance you could be pregnant. Oh no, I'm too old for that. Next thing, 9 months later, here we got a baby. You know, God's kind of funny about things like that. But like I said, midwives took care of the whole family from birth to death. That means if I get there and I take care of your family and maybe the baby dies, I'm going to clean that baby up and I'm going to dress him for viewing and close his little eyes, and I will most likely be at that funeral as well. We did the same thing. So we were almost like the first undertakers. You know, we dressed the body, we cleaned the body, we would get it ready. Now, I leave this family who's incredibly sick because while I'm there and they're starting to get better, we hear this. I hear the midwife's here. Can I talk to her? I need the midwife. My wife's having a baby. Well, your wife's had 3 or 4. We're good. I'll be there. No, you got to come. It's not right this time. Well, I've been with this family who's incredibly sick, so I clean my hands off a little bit. Same clothes, and I rush over, maybe a mile, maybe 5, maybe 10. We don't know how far this lady is. And I get there, and I deliver this baby. Catch. I hand off. Let somebody else clean it, and I'm doing my job. Do you think maybe this lady might have gotten sick a few days later? Yeah, probably. And why do you think that is? Germs. Because I've got all those germs on me. And we all know about viruses now, but they didn't understand that then. They knew that if you were sick with the yellow fever, you had smallpox, if I put you away from everybody else, you wouldn't get that. But we didn't really understand the way they were transmitted to each other. So a lot of people died for just lack of knowing. You know, I tell people ignorance is okay. You can teach ignorance. You just can't fix stupid. So, you know, here we are. Now, we have herbs that we used. If I have a lady who is giving birth and she's bleeding a lot, and after she's delivered and she's still bleeding, I'm going to probably pack her a little bit with some yarrow. Yarrow's great for clotting the blood and making it stop from bleeding. It's really good. Soldiers would carry it with them on the battlefield. You'd get stuck with a bayonet or a knife or a gun wound, they could pack that with yarrow and it would clot the blood. Today, that is still used for the same thing. But oftentimes, herbs that we use then are not necessarily for the same reason we use them now. We've learned that they have a better use than we were using them for. One of the herbs that people always say to me is, well, lavender must have been used greatly in colonial America. No, it wasn't. I've been told, I have not looked this up, I'm not going to lie, the word lava means to clean or to cleanse, which means that tells you you would clean with this. So what they did, a lot of apothecaries would boil the water, add lavender herbs, you know, the flower, and let it steep, and then they made a cleaner with it. So it smelled good, and it actually worked really well, because now we know that lavender is antimicrobial. So that's a wonderful thing. So if you wanted to make a vinegar with lavender in it and let it steep, and then you could strain that and clean your countertops with it, and it would smell really good, and it's a cheap cleaner. You can give me the royalties for that recipe later. Plantain was known by the natives as the white man's footprint. Everywhere the white man went, plantain showed up. Plantain is everywhere out here. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but it's infected my yard. It's just, I don't have a lawn. I have plantain and some comfrey, and you know, and I'm okay with that. I don't mind. But it's taken over everywhere, and it because it's a little seed head, and then it just blows away, and then it just leaves all these little babies everywhere. Plantain is great. The moment you get stung by something or you have an itch, pick up some plantain. Hopefully you haven't sprayed the ground or the dog hasn't done his business. But take that up, macerate it, chew on it, do something, stick it on there. It's going to stop the itching. It's fabulous. It's always been used for that, still used for that. I think we did it the other day. You know, and then I realized, oh, I got some stuff on the shelf that does that too. But it's more dramatic when you chew up the weed and stick it on your body. People think that's really cool. And then I'm going in the background because it's really not cool. Catnip. Let me give you a little secret about catnip. We all know what catnip does to cats. Has the opposite effect to humans. So catnip is very calming and relaxing. So if your mother-in-law is coming over to visit, you can drink some catnip tea before she gets there.
Quick question.
Yes.
Can I give that to the mother-in-law?
You
so
can
she
give it
knows
to the mother-in-law. Now the other tea that you can't give your mother-in-law is oleander tea.
Why is that?
Because oleander will kill her. Now, my mother-in-law knew that when I offered her oleander tea, that meant she needed to leave, that I was done with her. And she did. She would go to her room because she lived with us for a while. So, and again, a lot of men died on the frontier, mysteriously. And the woman would be like, husband died, go get me a new one. And I think she just kept killing him until she found the right one. Or found a rich enough one that, you know, it wasn't a big deal, and then he died, and woo, there we go. And then she'd go to another state and, you know, probably hook up with a good-looking guy, and who cares, you know? Life hasn't changed much. But the beauty of it was there was no autopsies, there was no forensics, so things happened. We also gave them medicine on accident, thinking we were helping them. I don't think strychnine's a good remedy these days, or arsenic, but those were things that we used back then. And in small doses, okay, they're not bad. Anybody here eat apples? Anybody here ever chew the seeds? Why? It's got cyanide, it's got arsenic, right? Yeah, it's got something that's poisonous. But a little bit of poison, I've been told, will help you build a tolerance. I have a friend of mine who every year, as soon as the poison ivy starts to come out, when the little leaves are about the size of little mouse ears, he goes out and gets it, puts it in some bread and eats it. I have yet to do that. I am not allergic to poison ivy. I don't have that problem. My husband walks out and it goes, hey, how are you? So, but he says if you get used to it, it's in your body. You get an immunity built up to it. Well, we know a little bit about immunity to that. Native Americans have been doing that forever. They knew about that. They're kind of like, well, what's wrong with you? Why do you have poison ivy? You're an idiot. Don't squat there. You know? Be smarter than that. But we didn't know when they did. It's because when they have an allergic reaction to it, they start eating it. Little doses, a little bit, go a long way. We use herbs, like I said, we use herbs now for things. And, you know, that's become a big surgence again, right? You know, learning herbalism and going back the natural path. And that's great. But you have to be careful because all herbs do really good in small doses. But the thing about that is some herbs don't do good at all for everybody. You might do wonderful with mullein, and I could be allergic to it. So you have to remember herbs are plants. Anybody here got a ragweed allergy? Right? Goldenrod gets blamed for that. They're two different plants. They kind of look alike. So everybody goes out to the yard and pulls out all their goldenrod, and next thing you know, the good one's gone and the other one's just blooming, just having a good time. You know, so we have to, a lot of them look alike. Anybody know what Queen Anne's lace is? Yeah. Right? Looks a little bit like another plant. What do you know what that one's called? Yes, that one, and yarrow. Right? And they'll say, oh, well, this is yarrow. No, that's Queen Anne's lace. Is Queen Anne's lace poisonous? No. But poison hemlock is, and they look an awful lot alike. So before you go and say, I heard on YouTube that this is really great, Shawnee says, remember, I only play a midwife on TV. And I know nothing about birth and no babies. Okay? But please, learn your herbs before you try them. Don't just take everybody's word for it. A lot of people who were midwives back in the day, they didn't leave a lot of paperwork. There's not a lot of really written history about women unless they behave badly. And there's some truth behind that. You know, It was the false quote that Marilyn Monroe supposedly said, that, only misbehaved women make history. That's kind of true. Martha Ballard kept the diary, but mostly for herself. And the diary went something like, woke up this morning, felt poorly. I had to go to Mrs. Smith's house, and she was, feeling well, but when I left her, she felt cleverly. Those are words we don't use now. Cleverly, what's that mean? Does that mean good? Okay, she felt cleverly. I mean, was she funny? Okay, she left cleverly. 3 days later, Mrs. Smith is feeling poorly. Well, gee, you went over there feeling poorly. You think maybe that had something to do with it. But she wrote things like, delivered Mr. Hex's baby, and here he is, and he's doing well, and he's thriving, and in return I received. And then she quotes what she got. It might have been flour or corn or some flax or some linen. There was a lot of bartering going on, especially with midwives, because again, medicine is expensive, even on a midwife level. So she would come to you and she would take care of your family or birth your baby or stitch you up or do something for you, and you would have to pay her. Well, what if you don't have any money? You got to give her something. Sometimes she would receive this drink she called rum. She was very happy when she received that because it was medicinal. So, there's something to be said about that. I think we like that medicine. I make tinctures and alcohol. Anybody here drink vanilla extract or have vanilla extract for baking? Right? Vanilla beans in, alcohol of some form, right? So we've been doing it a long time. We're not inventing the wheel here. This has been around since the beginning of time. Now, do you think I might have learned something from some of the slaves or the other cultures that came here? Because they have different practices and they did different things. And I think, we don't have documentation, but I kind of think we might have worked together a little bit and realized that we needed to work together. And you might have a great way of doing something. And I was like, I really like that. And then you would teach it to me and we would teach each other. And I'm pretty sure that's what we call them French fries, because the French, called them potatoes. And I don't know, we think the French invented it or something. We all kind of adapt from each other. Martha Ballard was interesting because Martha Ballard and two other men went to the same scene that happened in town. And in the two gentlemen's diaries, not one mention of a woman was in it at all. And she wrote hardly about any of the men. And we wonder why police officers can't get the report from the same people correctly, right? Because they're all different. We all have a different take. If you like the color red, you're going to see the red vehicles on the road. If I like the color blue, I'm going to notice the blue ones. And that's what people did. So when you describe a sickness to someone, you're going to do it to something that you know. Now, if you're going to come over and tell me that somebody is sick and they're having this come out, they can't keep anything down, right? You're describing this to me. I now know that they haven't had any fluids or any food for several days. They could die with that, right? We know that now. 3 days or so without food, without water, like 3 weeks without food, someone's going to probably pass. We need to hydrate them. How are we going to hydrate them? Yep, we are going to make a tea. If I like you, I'm going to let it cool. And then I'm going to put in a tube in the bottom area, and we're going to give you a clister. We now call them enemas. And that's going to absorb that. And you're going to get hydrated. At least you won't die of dehydration. They call them clisters, so if you're ever reading and you hear about someone performing a clister, you now know what that was. And you would take that tea, get some electrolytes, maybe put some salt in it, because salt's really good for the body in low doses. We don't need to eat, 15 pickles, but I know, unless you're pregnant. And that's a whole nother midwife call, so let's not go there. So you have to realize about, the fact that we didn't have a lot of things. Vitamin C. Vitamin C was rare. How do we get vitamin C now naturally? Citrus, right? See a lot of orange trees around here? Nope. But there is a plant that grows that has a massive amount of vitamin C, more than an orange. Rose hips. And long hunters and people who were traveling, just anybody who was traveling, would take dried rose hips and keep that in their pack, and then they could crush them up and make a tea. Or you could eat them right off the vine, you know, right off the rose. Now, they come with thorns, so be careful.
What about blackberries? Do they have any seeds?
I don't know if blackberries have vitamin C, but they've got great vitamins. And anytime you can eat fresh fruit is always wonderful. But rose hips are fabulous. And you might be reading a story and you'll hear about the crushed rose hips that they carried. Now, I heard a really great story about this. It has nothing to do with midwifery, but I love it. Hush puppies. Where do they get their name? What do we call them, hush puppies? Do you know?
Leftover batter that they fried up and fed to the dogs to keep them quieter on the campfire.
Yeah, that's kind of about the story I heard. Or people use them when they're trying to run from the law. They would throw them for the dogs that were chasing them, so they'd hush the puppies. I love that. See, history's got really great little things that if you just read it, you would laugh. The anecdotes and just the stuff is really interesting. Again, not a lot about midwives. Martha Ballard there's a book, if you can get it on Audible or you can read it. It's about the diary of hers, and a lady talks about her diary. There's also a movie you can watch. And what is a really great thing, this woman not only was a midwife, but she was a mother, and she had children. And those children would grow up and they would leave. And then what do? Who's going to be take care of the house? Who's going to, if I'm gone for 3, 4, 5 days taking care of your family because you're sick, what's happening to my house? Who's feeding my animals? Who's milking my cow? Who's collecting the eggs? Kids usually did it. Possibly the husband if he wasn't working. Now, how many of your wives have your husband who cooks and when you come home there's dishes everywhere? It was no different back then. Absolutely no different. And I will tell you the same thing I told people yesterday. If my husband wasn't so good looking, he might have some oleander tea too. Because I can leave for 4 or 5 days and I come back and there's just lots of dishes and I'm not quite sure where they came from. But this is where your neighbors, this is the beauty of the 18th century and centuries prior to that. You know I'm gone because towns are small and you know that the Smiths are sick, so you're going to come take care of my family. We did things like that for each other. You might have too many children. And you might say, yeah, I would really like you to take my oldest daughter and let her come live with you and she can work and clean and take care of you because your daughters have moved away and gotten married. And can you teach her some midwife skills? And I said, absolutely, because that's free labor. And I'm going to do that. And we like free labor because it's a barter and a trade. Right? How many times do you guys go do something for your friend and then when you need something, you can call them and they come help you? In the 18th century, we did that all the time. You know, cities and towns and villages were not built off of one person. People traveled in groups. The Mayflower did not have a captain and one person on board. They had a group of people who tried to live together in harmony. And if we can't live in harmony, then things fall apart. And then there's then there's deaths, and then the midwife has to get involved. You know, so death and birth, you know, we're here. We're here going to take care of you. Does anybody have any questions about the life of a midwife and what we did? No? No questions at all? I can't have possibly covered every single thing in the whole world.
I just want to know, the first midwife you mentioned, Bridget, 1620?
Yeah, it was 1620, 1644. She's on the ship in 1620.
Does it say which ship?
It does not. It may, but I did not write that down.
Yeah.
Because I didn't think that was super
One
important.
baby born on the Mayflower.
Right, but there were 3 on this. Well, there's no babies on the Mayflower, no.
Yeah,
Well,
the Mayflower.
Yeah, 'cause there were women on the
because
Mayflower.
That was my great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, the Hopkins, and she
Yeah.
had Oceanus.
Yeah. A lot of babies didn't make it.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of babies...
There
Now,
were
Martha
more.
Ballard didn't have any babies that died. She delivered over 800 babies. And they didn't die.
I bet she knew clean technique but didn't realize it.
She knew, she probably did. She didn't write it down. We don't write down things that we know, right? Like if you asked me to make an omelet and I wrote in my diary that you asked me to make an omelet today, am I going to say that I cracked 3 eggs, not 2, and I stirred them with my right hand in a clockwise? I'm not going to do that, right? We just all knew these things, and we've lost that because we don't know them now. So maybe if you're writing a diary, you should, describe your shoes and take pictures and post them in there so our ancestors, in 200 years actually know what a pair of loafers looks like or a pair of cowboy boots. Because what's going to happen is they're going to see all these pictures of us dressed like this and they're going to think, what happened? Wow, that time period was really long. but there was this really great thing that happened in between, and there was a reversion back, and they're going to be really confused. And I'm really looking forward to that. I really want to see that.
Yeah, that's a good example though, because Moose Weininger, Anthony, he did a video about doing the flint and steel, and he said very hard to find any written records of how to do it because everybody
knew how to do it.
Right, so why would you write it down?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, now, when you have a new daughter-in-law and you have to teach her how to cook, you have to explain it to her. But when she knows how to do something, you would just say, go make breakfast. I would like to have an omelet today, and she's going to be able to go and do that. Same thing with midwifery, same thing with any kind of profession you have in anything. Once you know how to do it, you don't usually describe what you do. How was your day? My day was good. I didn't tell you everything I did. How was your patient? I left her cleverly. Or she was feeling mighty poor. You know, and there wasn't a lot of words that they used like that. They were very, you know, you got to remember, a lot of women didn't read or write. I don't have to be able to read and write and be a midwife. I don't have to be able to read and write and be able to take apart an engine. I might be able to read and write and have to put it back together, but I can tear one apart. Really good.
I will say one thing though, it might not be on the frontier, but in the cities, as they grew, people wore gloves. That was a common custom, and I think they made the connection between sickness and you went out without being properly dressed.
Maybe,
you left
absolutely.
your gloves.
Well, there was a reason for gloves.
Yeah.
You know, because you didn't want people to touch you.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you came home, you took them off.
You took them off.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the really interesting things I think is what we don't think about is this is the frontier. So my neighbor is not very close. Even my neighbor now is over a ridge. So I would have to do an awful long walk to get to his house or go over the ridge. When you had a midwife that lived in town, even in a town like Virginia or Colonial Williamsburg, the houses weren't too terribly far apart. But you can imagine that knock at 2 o'clock in the morning. I need the midwife, and it's winter, and she's got to walk in the snow. Now, hopefully, the person who needed you maybe came with a buggy or a horse, but most likely they did not. So now you're trekking through there in the snow or the rain or the sleet. I don't care what it is. And then I think that's where we get that whole going to school uphill both ways in the snow, because it was treacherous, but we did it. And we did it because we didn't have another option, right? I can't let my neighbor die. If my calling is to be a midwife, I'm going to take care of you no matter what. We didn't take an oath, but I think we took an oath. We didn't have that doctor's oath, but we wanted to make sure people lived. Very interesting thing about midwifery, and we talk about this, and I'm going to say this, and that illegitimate children happened a lot. And as long as they got married after the baby was born, no one cared. No one cared. I'm not saying no, and I'm generalizing. I'm sure there were those people who really cared. But they felt that women could not lie during childbirth. I want you to know I lied to my mother the day I had that baby. No, Mama, I didn't get pregnant by drinking. Nope, didn't happen at all. Lied to her the day, the after, until the day she died. We can lie whenever, okay? But they really felt that a woman was in that much distress and that much pain, she could not lie. So it was a midwife's job in certain towns to say, who is the father? And then when they said that baby's name in labor, that man was now responsible for that child legally.
I wonder how long that lasted.
I don't know how long that lasted, but I'm pretty glad we're all happy with DNA now. Because, but this was their idea of women and their not being able to handle pain and stress and endure the things that men could do. So a woman would never think to lie during childbirth. She was just incapable of it. So with that note, I thank you for coming.
Thank you. Good notes.